I buried André on a Tuesday. By Thursday, I'd killed something wearing his face, standing in the doorway of his own bait shop at 9:47 p.m., smiling at me with a mouth that had too many teeth and not enough space between them. I used the gaff hook from behind the counter, the one André had sharpened to a surgical point and mounted within arm's reach of the register, which I'd assumed was for self-defense against robbers, but which I now understand was for exactly what I used it for. The thing that looked like André didn't bleed right. That's all I'll say about that for now. I need to back up. I need to tell this in order, because the order is how you survive it, and some of you listening might need to survive it. André Thibodeau was my mother's sister's only son. He was 41 when he died, 7 years older than me, and in the grand taxonomy of Louisiana family relationships, where everyone is connected to everyone by blood or marriage or a crawfish boil in 1997, André was the cousin I was closest to, despite seeing him maybe twice a year. We talked on the phone, long calls, late at night. The kind where you can hear the frogs and the water through the other person's open window. André lived alone in Dulac, Louisiana, which is about as far south as you can go in Terrebonne Parish before the land gives up its argument with the Gulf and becomes marsh, then water, then nothing. Dulac is not a town the way most people think of towns. It's a scattering of houses and trailers and docks along a two-lane road that runs through wetland so flat and featureless that the sky feels like it starts at your ankles. The population has been dropping for 20 years. Saltwater intrusion killing the land, hurricanes erasing what's left, the young people leaving for Houma or Baton Rouge or Houston because there's nothing to stay for except the water and the memory of a place that used to be bigger. The people who remain are Cajun, Houma Nation, Filipino fishing families who've been there for generations, and a handful of stubborn individuals who can't leave or won't leave or don't know the difference anymore. André was one of those. His bait shop, Thibodeau Live Bait and Tackle, sat on a shell and gravel lot at the intersection of Shrimpers Row and the Parish Road, about a quarter-mile from the Bayou. Cinder block building, corrugated metal roof, a screened-in porch where old men drank coffee and argued about redfish. Inside, concrete floor, fluorescent lights, a long counter with a cash register that still had mechanical buttons, wall racks of lures and line and sinkers, chest freezers full of frozen shrimp and mullet, and 4 aerated live wells along the back wall holding shiners, pogies, and whatever else André had netted or trapped that week. It smelled like brine and gasoline and the particular sweetness of live bait water that's been recirculated through the same pumps for years. André made a living, not much of one, but a living. Enough to keep the shop open and himself fed and his truck running and his portion of the family land taxes paid. He was happy there, or at least he presented happiness convincingly enough that I never thought to question it. He knew every fisherman within 30 miles by name. He knew the water, which bayous were running, which passes were open, where the speckled trout were schooling on any given Tuesday in October. He was rooted in that place the way a cypress is rooted, and like a cypress, he looked permanent right up until the moment he wasn't. He died on March 14th, 2026. Massive stroke. They found him on the porch of the shop with a coffee cup still in his hand, sitting in the chair he always sat in, looking out at the road like he was waiting for someone. He was dead before he hit the ground, the paramedics said, which is the kind of thing paramedics say whether it's true or not because it's kinder than the alternative. His will left everything to me. The shop, the land, the inventory, the building and its contents. Everything. I was the only family he had left who was young enough and unattached enough to potentially do something with it, I suppose. His mother, my Aunt Celeste, was in a memory care facility in Thibodeau. His father had been dead since 2011. No siblings, no partner, no children that anyone knew about. The lawyer in Houma read me the will. It was simple. 2 pages. At the bottom, below the legal language, André had handwritten a note in blue ink. It said, "Mitch, the shop is yours if you want it. If you don't, sell it. But if you keep it, you need to close it right. The rules are in the register drawer. Don't skip any. Don't change the order. I'm sorry I never told you about this while I was alive. I didn't know how." I read it twice. Then I asked the lawyer if André had been in good mental health before the stroke. The lawyer, a bored, efficient man named Arsenault, who looked like he'd probated 1,000 wills in Terrebonne Parish and found none of them interesting, shrugged and said, "Seemed fine to me." But I didn't know him personally. My advice? Go look at the shop, see if it's worth keeping. The property alone's got some value, though not much in this market. I should tell you who I am because it's going to matter. My name is Mitchell Landry. I'm 34. I grew up in Thibodaux, went to Nichols State for 2 years, dropped out, and spent my 20s working the kind of jobs that pay by the hour, and don't ask about your degree. Pipeline inspection, warehouse work, a stint on a shrimp boat that ended when the captain sold the boat, 2 years doing HVAC in Baton Rouge that ended when the company lost its contract. By the time André died, I was living in a rented duplex in Houma, working part-time at an auto parts store for $14.75 an hour, and trying to figure out what the next 10 years of my life were supposed to look like, given that the last 10 had not gone according to any plan I'd ever made. I was not desperate in the way that makes people take dangerous jobs. I want to be clear about that. I had rent. I had food. I had a car that ran. What I didn't have was direction or momentum, or any particular reason to believe that the trajectory I was on led anywhere other than more of the same. And when the will was read, and I realized that André had left me a functioning business, a small one, a humble one, but a business with inventory and customers and a reason to get up in the morning, I felt something I hadn't felt in a while. I felt like I'd been chosen, like someone who knew me had looked at my life and decided I was capable of more than I was currently doing, and had given me the tool to prove it. That feeling mattered, remember that. It's part of why I stayed as long as I did. I drove down to Dulac on the Saturday after the funeral. March 22nd. The drive from Houma takes about 45 minutes on Highway 315, which cuts through flat sugarcane fields that gradually give way to marsh as you go south. By the time you reach Dulac, the land is barely there. Narrow strips of grass between widening channels of brown water, the road itself feeling provisional, like the parish keeps repaving it as a dare. The shop was locked. I had André's keys from his personal effects. I opened the front door and stepped inside, and the smell hit me. Brine, gasoline, bait water, the faint mineral smell of the concrete floor. And I stood there for a minute in the gray light from the dirty windows, breathing it in, letting myself feel the loss. The live wells were still running. The pumps were on a dedicated circuit with a battery backup, one of André's few upgrades. The shiners were alive and circling in their steady, mindless loops. Someone, a neighbor probably, had been keeping the operation going in the days since André's death. I found out later it was a man named Trosclair who ran a dock repair service down the road. He'd been feeding the bait and checking the pumps without being asked, because that's how Dulac works, or worked, when there were still enough people to look after each other. I went behind the counter. The register was a vintage National Cash register, heavy brass, the kind you see in antique shops, except this one was still in service. I opened the drawer. Inside, on top of the cash tray, was a folded piece of paper, lined yellow legal pad paper, creased and worn, covered in André's handwriting. A cramped, angular script that leaned hard to the right, like every word was trying to get somewhere faster than the hand could carry it. The paper was soft from handling, as though it had been folded and unfolded many times. I unfolded it. At the top, in block letters, closing rules. Do every night. No exceptions. And below that, numbered 1 through 9. 1. Begin closing at exactly 9 p.m. Lock the front door first, then the side door, then the porch screen door. That order. Don't reverse it. 2. Turn off the fluorescent lights in the main room. Leave the counter light on. Leave the live well lights on. The shop should be dim, not dark. It needs to see that you're still here. 3. Walk the center aisle from front to back. Count the chest freezers. There should be 4. If there are 5, do not open the 5th. Go back to the counter and wait 10 minutes, then count again. There will be 4. 4. Check the live wells. The water should be circulating. If one of the pumps has stopped, restart it before you do anything else. The water has to be moving. Still water in this building after dark is an invitation. 5. At 9:15, open the back door. The one that faces the Bayou, and leave it open for exactly 5 minutes. Close it at 9:20. Do not look through it while it's open. Stand at the counter and face the front wall. You'll hear sounds from the water. That's expected. What you're hearing is not in the water. It's in the door. The door has to breathe, or the building holds its breath all night, and the air goes wrong. 6. At 9:20, after closing the back door, say the following out loud. Fermez pour la nuit, retournez à l'eau. Your pronunciation doesn't matter. It knows what you mean. 7. Between 9:20 and 9:45, you may hear knocking at the front door. The knocking will be polite. It will sound like a customer who arrived late, like someone who just needs one thing. Do not go to the door. Do not answer. Do not say we're closed, or any other response. Silence is the only correct reply to a knock after closing. 8. At 9:45, check the porch. Turn on the porch light and look through the screen door. The porch should be empty. If there is a chair that wasn't there before, go back inside and wait 5 more minutes. If there is a person sitting in a chair, go back inside and do not check the porch again until morning. They will be gone by dawn. They always leave by dawn. 9. You can leave the building at 10 p.m., not before. Walk to your vehicle without stopping. Do not respond if someone calls your name from the direction of the water. Start your engine and drive. Don't look in the rear view until you've passed the Pointe aux Chiens sign on 665. I read the rules standing behind the counter in the gray afternoon light with the pumps humming and the shiners circling and the smell of my dead cousin's life all around me. And I had 2 reactions, one after the other, separated by about 3 seconds. The first was, André was losing it. The stroke had been building. He'd been having cognitive episodes, paranoia, small vessel disease in the brain, something. This was the evidence. A man who'd been alone too long in a dying town at the bottom of a sinking parish, writing ritual instructions to manage anxieties that had calcified into superstition. The second reaction, which arrived 3 seconds later and has never fully left, was, André was the most practical man I ever knew. He replaced his truck's brake pads himself because he didn't trust the shop in Huma. He kept 3 months of operating expenses in a cash box under the floor because he didn't trust banks after the 2008 crash. He wasn't a superstitious man. He wasn't a religious man. He was a man who did things for reasons. And if he'd written 9 rules on a piece of yellow paper and kept them in the register drawer, and referred to them in his last will and testament, then André had reasons. I folded the paper and put it in my pocket. Then I called Trosclair. Emile Trosclair was 63, built like a dock piling. Short, thick, weathered to a uniform brown. And he had the conversational style of a man who said only what was necessary and considered most things unnecessary. He met me at the shop that afternoon. We sat on the porch in André's chairs and drank coffee from a thermos he'd brought. You keeping the shop? He asked. Thinking about it. Good shop. Makes money if you're here every day. André was here every day. I know. You know how to run bait? I can learn. Trosclair looked at me with the appraising squint of someone who knows the difference between willingness and competence, and knows that one is useful without the other. André taught you to fish, he said, not a question. When I was a kid, yeah? Then you know the water. The rest is inventory and conversation. You'll be fine during the day. He paused, drank coffee, looked at the road, which was empty because the road was always empty. You find the paper? I went still. What paper? The one in the register. You know about the rules. I know André had rules. I don't know what they say. He never showed me. He told me once after a hurricane, Ida, I think. Might have been Zeta. He told me the most important thing about the shop wasn't the inventory or the building. He said it was closing right. He said if you close right, you can open the next morning. If you don't, there's no next morning worth opening. Trosclair, what's in the Bayou? He didn't answer immediately. He finished his coffee. He screwed the thermos cap on with the deliberate care of a man performing maintenance on an object he intended to use for another 20 years. Then he said, something that was here before the shop, before the road, before Dulac. André's grandfather built this place in 1961. His grandfather knew what was in the water. His grandfather made the first rules. André's were different. Updated, I think, adjusted over time. But the principle's the same. What principle? You're on the edge, Mitchell. Land and water, right here, this lot, this building. You're on the seam. Things come up to the seam at night, the way fish come up to a change in current. They come up and they look across and they want to come further. The rules are how you close the seam. What things? Trosclair stood up. He rinsed his thermos cup with water from a jug by the door, an automatic gesture, something he'd done 1,000 times on this porch. The things André kept out for 30 years, he said. You'll know them when you hear the knocking. He left. I sat on the porch with my dead cousin's rules in my pocket, and the bayou a quarter-mile away through the marsh grass, a flat brown line under a flat white sky. And I listened to the pumps inside the shop cycling the bait water, and I thought about seams. I opened the shop the next Monday, March 24th. I moved my things down from Houma over the weekend. Didn't take long since my things fit in the bed of my truck with room to spare. And set up in André's house, a small raised cottage about 200 yards from the shop on the same lot. I gave my landlord notice. I quit the auto parts job. I committed. The first 2 weeks were almost normal, almost good. The regulars came back quickly. Fishermen who'd been buying from André for years and who sized me up with the frank, unhurried evaluation that rural Louisiana extends to anyone new, which is to say they watched me bait a hook and make change and answer questions about water conditions, and they decided, slowly, individually, that I'd do. Trosclair helped. He'd stop by in the mornings and tell me who was fishing where and what they were catching and what bait they'd need. Information that was the social currency of the shop, and that I'd have taken months to accumulate on my own. I learned the rhythms. Dawn was busy. Fishermen getting bait before heading out. Midday was slow. Late afternoon brought people back for supplies or to sit on the porch and talk about what they'd caught or hadn't. I started closing the shop at 9, which had been André's hours, and I followed the rules. Every night, in order, without deviation. And for those first 2 weeks, the rules felt like nothing. I locked the doors in order. I dimmed the lights. I counted freezers, but always 4. I checked the pumps. I opened the back door at 9:15 and stood at the counter facing the front wall for 5 minutes, and I heard things from the direction of the water. Frogs, insects, the wet slap of something surfacing in the bayou. sounds that were ordinary and explainable and that I did not look at. I closed the back door. I said the French words, "Ferme pour la nuit, retournez à l'eau," closed for the night, go back to the water. My Cajun French was rusty but functional. I waited through the silence from 9:20 to 9:45, no knocking. I checked the porch, always empty. I left at 10. Every night nothing happened. And every night I did the rules anyway because André had asked me to, and because Trosclair's words, "If you close right, you can open the next morning," had a weight to them that I couldn't dismiss. Then the third week started, and then nothing stopped being nothing. Monday, April 7th, the first knock, 9:23 p.m. I was standing behind the counter in the dim light. Counter lamp on, live well lights on, everything else off, per the rules, and I heard 3 knocks at the front door. Measured, polite. The knock of a person who respects that you're closed, but hopes you might make an exception. My whole body went tight. Not because the knock was frightening, because the rules had predicted it. The knocking will be polite. It will sound like a customer who arrived late. André had described exactly what I was hearing, which meant André had heard it, which meant this was a thing that happened, and happening was different from being written on a piece of paper. I did not go to the door. I did not answer. I stood behind the counter, and I pressed my palms flat on the surface and I breathed. The knock came again. 3 more. Same rhythm. Patient. Then a voice. A man's voice, muffled through the door, friendly and a little sheepish. "Hey, y'all still open? Just need some shiners for the morning." My mouth opened. The words "sorry," "we're closed" were right there, formed and ready. The automatic response of anyone who's ever worked retail in America. The polite deflection, the social contract. I closed my mouth. Rule 7. Silence is the only correct reply to a knock after closing. The voice again. "I can see the lights on in there. Just take a second, I promise. Long drive tomorrow, trying to get set up tonight." Silence. Mine. A pause. Then the knocking stopped. I heard footsteps on the shell lot. The crunch of someone walking away. Then nothing. At 9:45, I checked the porch. Empty. At 10 o'clock, I walked to my truck and drove the 200 yards to the cottage, which was ridiculous, but the rules said drive. So I drove. I did not look in the rear view until I passed the Pointe aux Chênes sign, which meant I drove 3 miles south before allowing myself a mirror, then turned around and came back. Also ridiculous. But I did it. Inside the cottage, I sat on André's couch and I thought about the knock. A customer. A late fisherman. The most reasonable thing in the world. And André had written a rule about it, and I had followed the rule, and I had turned away a potential sale because a dead man's handwriting told me to. Either I was honoring a practical tradition I didn't yet understand, or I was losing my mind in the exact same way André might have lost his, and the difference between those two things was not yet clear. The knocking came back the next 3 nights, same time. Always between 9:20 and 9:35, same pattern. 3 knocks, a pause, a voice. Different voices, though. Tuesday was a woman. "Hello? I saw on Google Maps y'all were open till 9. I'm just a few minutes late." Wednesday was a younger man, tentative, almost apologetic. "Hey, my buddy said this was the place to get pogies. You guys closed already?" Thursday was 2 voices, overlapping, a couple maybe, laughing and knocking and saying something I couldn't quite make out through the door. I didn't answer any of them. I stood at the counter, and I waited, and they always left. Footsteps on shell, then gone. Friday, April 11th, the night the rules stopped being theoretical. I was at step 3, walking the center aisle, counting freezers. I counted them every night. Every night there were 4 chest freezers, white, identical, humming in a row along the east wall. 4. Friday night, there were 5. The 5th freezer was at the end of the row, pressed against the back wall. Same make, same model, same white paint, same electrical hum. It was plugged into an outlet I'd never noticed, and the power light was on, and frost had already formed on the lid, which meant it was cold, which meant it had been running. Rule 3. If there are 5, do not open the 5th. I stared at it. I'm not going to pretend I wasn't curious, because I'm a human being, and there was an object in my building that hadn't been there an hour ago, and every cell in my body wanted to open the lid and see what was inside. The curiosity was physical. My hand actually moved toward it before I caught myself. I went back to the counter. I waited 10 minutes. I walked the aisle again. 4 freezers. The 5th was gone. The outlet it had been plugged into was gone. The wall was unbroken cinder block, same as it had always been, and the floor where the 5th freezer had stood was dry and dusty and showed no marks. I said the French words at 9:20 and my voice cracked on retourne, and I didn't care. At 9:23 the knocking started. 3 knocks, a pause, then André's voice. Mitch? Come on, cousin. Open up. I'm standing out here like an idiot. I gripped the counter. André's voice. Not similar to André's voice. Not an impression, but André's actual voice. The voice I'd heard on the phone 100 times. The voice that called me cousin instead of cuz because he thought cuz sounded lazy. The voice that had a slight catch on hard consonants because he'd chipped a front tooth playing football at South Terrebonne High and never fixed it. Mitch, I forgot something in the back. Just let me in for a second. I'll be in and out. Rule 7. Silence. But this was André. This was my cousin, who'd left me everything he had, who'd trusted me with his life's work, whose death I was still carrying around like a weight I couldn't set down because setting it down felt like forgetting him. And he was outside the door, and he was asking me to open it, and every piece of me that loved him was screaming, let him in. I put my hand over my mouth, physically. I clamped my palm over my lips, and I stood behind the counter, and I did not speak. Mitch? A pause, then quieter. I know you're in there. I can hear the pumps. Silence. Mine. The hardest silence I've ever held. Footsteps on shell, receding, gone. I finished the rules, checked the porch. Empty. Left at 10. Drove to the cottage. I sat in the kitchen and I called Trosclair, and when he answered I said, "Something knocked tonight and it sounded like André." Trosclair was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Did you answer?" "No." "Good. It'll try harder next time. It learns what works." "What is it?" "I told you. Something at the seam. It comes up to the edge and it looks across and it wants to come further. The shop is the edge. Closing is when you draw the line." "But it used André's voice. How does it know André's voice?" Another silence. Then Trosclair said something that I haven't been able to shake, something that rearranged the architecture of everything I thought I understood. "Mitchell, who do you think André learned the rules from?" "His grandfather. You said..." "His grandfather made the first rules. André made these rules, new rules, updated. He changed them because the old ones stopped working, because the thing in the water learned the old ones. It adapted. André spent 30 years adapting with it. The rules you have aren't a tradition. They're a battle record. Every rule is a response to something that happened." I let that settle. "The 5th freezer," I said. "Rule 3. What happened that made André add that rule?" "I don't know the details, but there was a night, maybe 2014, 2015, where André called me at 3 in the morning and told me he'd almost opened something in the shop that wasn't supposed to be there. He was shaking. I could hear it in his voice. After that, He added rules. 2 or 3 new ones. The list was shorter before. The knocking. Was that one of the original rules? The knocking's always been there, since his grandfather's time. The knocking is the first thing. Everything else comes after. After what? After it realizes knocking isn't going to work. The next night, Saturday, April 12th, I broke a rule. I need you to understand that I didn't break it on purpose. I didn't break it out of curiosity or defiance or recklessness. I broke it because I'm a person who works in a bait shop, and sometimes the work isn't done at 9. I'd had a delivery that afternoon. A late shipment of frozen mullet from a supplier in Chauvin. The boxes arrived at 4:30, and I'd been busy with customers until closing. When 9 came, I had 3 cases of mullet still sitting on the floor, unrefrigerated, and if I didn't get them into the freezers, they'd be ruined by morning. So I locked the doors. Front, side, porch, in order. And I turned off the main lights, and then, instead of continuing the rules, I started loading mullet into the freezers. It took about 12 minutes. During those 12 minutes, I was not at the counter. I was at the back of the shop, opening freezer lids, stacking boxes, my hands numb with cold and my mind on waste and money rather than on the rules. I finished at 9:14. I went back to the counter and picked up where I'd left off. Step 5 was the back door. Open at 9:15, close at 9:20. I was on schedule. I'd just done steps 2 and 3 out of order, and that's all. The doors were locked. The lights were right. The freezers were 4. What difference could the sequence make? I opened the back door at 9:15. The Bayou was out there, 100 yards through the marsh grass, visible as a dark line under a sky that was clouding over from the west. The air that came in was warm and wet and heavy, the way Louisiana air is in April, dense enough to feel like something you could lean against. I turned my back to the door and faced the front wall, per the rule. The sounds started immediately. Not the usual sounds. Not frogs, not insects, not the ambient noise of a wetland at night. These were different. These were inside the doorway, behind me, close within the frame of the door itself, as though the threshold were producing them. A sound like water moving through a throat. A gurgling, rhythmic pulse, almost like breathing, but wetter, as though something were inhaling and exhaling through a mouthful of Bayou water. And under that, a low vibration. Not a hum, not a growl, but a resonance, a physical pressure in the air that I could feel in my chest and behind my eyes. The rule said the door has to breathe. The rule said the sounds were expected. But the rule also said to follow every step in order, and I hadn't, and the sounds I was hearing were not the sounds of a door breathing. They were the sounds of something that had found an opening in the sequence and was pressing through it. I waited. 9:16, 9:17. The sounds got louder. The gurgling became more defined. Not water through a throat, I realize now, but voices through water. Multiple voices layered, speaking simultaneously in a language I didn't recognize, except that every few seconds a word would surface that I did recognize. My name. Mitchell, rising out of the babble like a bubble breaking the surface. 9:18. I felt warmth on my back, not the ambient warmth of the air. A specific located warmth, like body heat, like someone standing directly behind me, close enough that if I stepped backward, I would make contact. 9:19. The warmth intensified, the voices clarified. One of them separated from the others and spoke directly into my ear. I felt breath. I felt the moisture of exhalation on my skin. And it said in André's voice, clearly, intimately, with the tenderness of a confidence shared between family. You got the order wrong, Mitch. Now I'm inside. I closed the back door. I slammed it. I threw the deadbolt and I backed away and I stood at the counter and I said the French words, ferme pour la nuit, retournez à l'eau. And my voice was loud and ragged, and I said it 3 times because once didn't feel like enough. The warmth behind me faded. The voices stopped. The shop was quiet except for the pumps and my breathing, which sounded like a man who'd been running. I finished the rules. The knocking came at 9:27. 3 knocks, a pause, Andre's voice again. "Mitch, you left the mullet out." I didn't answer. The porch at 9:45 was empty. I left at 10 o'clock. But something was different. Something in the shop had shifted. The air was heavier. The shadows in the corners were darker than the dim lighting could account for. And the live well nearest the back door, the one holding the pogies, the water was still. The pump was running. I could hear it cycling, but the water wasn't moving. The surface was flat and glassy, and the pogies were motionless, suspended in the still water like specimens in formaldehyde, their eyes open and fixed and their gills not moving. I restarted the pump. Nothing changed. I reached in and touched the water, and it was warm. Blood warm, bathwater warm, warmer than aerated bait water should ever be. I pulled my hand out, and my fingers were coated in something that wasn't water. Thicker, slightly viscous. It caught the light with a faint iridescence, like oil but organic, like the slime on a catfish, but without a catfish to account for it. I wiped my hand on my jeans and I left. Rule 4. Still water in this building after dark is an invitation. I'd gotten the order wrong. The door had breathed in something it wasn't supposed to. And the still water in the live well was the evidence that the place in the shop where the seam had thinned, where the boundary between the building and the bayou had become permeable. An invitation. Something had been invited in, and I had no rule for getting it out. Sunday, I didn't open the shop. I called Trosclair. "I made a mistake," I said. He came over. I told him everything. The broken sequence, the sounds in the doorway, the voice in my ear, the still water. He listened without expression, which I was beginning to understand was his way of processing things that frightened him. The stillness of a man who had trained himself not to react, because reaction was a luxury he'd learned to do without. When I finished, he said, "Show me the live well." We went to the shop. Daylight. The shop looked normal. Just a bait shop, concrete and fluorescence and the mechanical hum of pumps. The live well nearest the back door was circulating normally. The water was cool. The pogies were swimming. There was no slime, no warmth, no stillness. "It's fine," I said. Trosclair looked at the live well for a long time. Then he looked at the back door. Then he looked at me. "It's not fine during the day," he said. "It's dormant during the day, this thing. Whatever it is. It lives in the transition, dusk and after. The seam opens when the light changes. Andre's grandfather figured that out. That's why the rules are for closing. Not because nighttime is dangerous. Because the change is dangerous. The moment the shop goes from open to closed, from day function to night function, that's when the edge is thinnest. The rules are the transition. They're how you guide the building from one state to the other without leaving a gap. I left a gap. You left a gap, and something got a foot in. What do I do? Trosclair sat down on a crate. He rubbed his face with both hands, and for the first time I saw him look old. Not weathered, not tough, but old. The way people look when they're tired of knowing things that younger people are just learning. André had a situation like this in 2019, he said. After Tropical Storm Barry, the shop flooded. 2 feet of storm surge, salt water in the building for 3 days. When the water went down, the rules didn't work right for weeks. Things were inside, in the walls, in the floor, in the water system. André said it was like the building had gotten confused about which side of the seam it was on. How did he fix it? He didn't fix it. He adapted the rules. He added steps, closed gaps, tightened the sequence. And over time, whatever had gotten in was pushed back out, not removed, crowded out. The rules are like, imagine a lock with 9 tumblers. If all 9 engage in order, the lock holds. If one's out of sequence, the lock doesn't fully close, and something can slip through. But you can still re-engage the tumblers. You just have to be more precise. How precise? Trosclair looked at me. André was precise for 30 years, and he still died at 61 of a stroke that his doctor said should have happened to a man of 80. The stress of it ages you. This isn't a job you do without cost, Mitchell. André knew that. He left you the shop anyway, because he thought you were strong enough. Whether he was right is something you're going to find out. He was right. I'm going to tell you that now, before I tell you the rest, because I want you to hear what comes next, knowing that I survived it. I'm here. I'm speaking to you. That fact should give you some comfort during the parts that are hard to hear. Monday night, I closed the shop with absolute precision, every step in order timed to the minute. I locked the doors, I dimmed the lights, I counted freezers. 4, I checked the pumps. All running. I opened the back door at 9:15 and stood at the counter facing the front wall, and the sounds from the doorway were normal again. Frogs, water, the bayou being the bayou. No voices, no warmth. The door breathed correctly. I closed it at 9:20. I said the words. The knocking came at 9:24. 3 knocks. A man's voice I didn't recognize. Hey, I left my tackle bag on the porch. Can I just grab it real quick? Silence. At 9:45, I checked the porch. Empty. Good. But the live well, the one near the back door. At 9:47, as I was making my final check before leaving, the water in that well went still, just for a moment, maybe 3 seconds. The pump cycling but the surface flattening, the pogies freezing in place, their eyes catching the light. Then the pump caught, and the water moved and the fish swam, and everything was normal. 3 seconds. A flicker. Like something testing the gap I'd made, checking to see if it was still there. It was. I closed right every night for the next 2 weeks. Perfect sequence, perfect timing, and every night, the still water flicker happened. Always the same, well, always the same 3-second pause, always between 9:45 and 9:50. The gap was holding. Whatever I'd let in, or let start to come in. It had established a foothold, a tiny tear in the fabric of the rules, and my nightly precision was containing it but not closing it. I started to understand André differently, not as a man following inherited tradition, but as a man engaged in active, ongoing, nightly combat with something that probed for weakness the way water probes for cracks. 30 years of this. 30 years of locking doors in the right order and saying French words into an empty room and not answering when something knocked with the voice of someone you loved. 30 years, and the strain of it had killed him. And he'd left it to me because the alternative was leaving it to no one. And no one meant the shop closed, and the shop closing meant no one was closing it right, and then the seam opened for good. I wasn't maintaining a building. I was continuing a war. April 28th. The night everything came to a head. I was at step 8, checking the porch at 9:45. I turned on the porch light. I looked through the screen door. There was a chair on the porch that hadn't been there before. Not one of André's chairs. His 2 chairs were where they always were, flanking the door. This was a 3rd chair, wooden, old. The kind of ladder-back chair you'd see in a Cajun kitchen from the 1960s. It was positioned facing the bayou, as if whoever had placed it there wanted to sit and look at the water. Rule 8. If there is a chair that wasn't there before, go back inside and wait 5 more minutes. I went back inside. I waited 5 minutes. At 9:50, I checked again. The chair was still there, and now there was a person sitting in it. Rule 8. If there is a person sitting in a chair, go back inside and do not check the porch again until morning. But here's where the rules failed me, or where I failed the rules, or where the gap I'd made 2 weeks ago finally tore wide enough for something to come all the way through. The person in the chair was André. Not a voice through a door, not a sound in the dark. André, physical and solid and present, sitting in a ladder-back chair on the porch of his own bait shop, wearing the khaki work shirt and the saint's cap he always wore, looking out at the bayou with the settled calm of a man who'd been doing this every evening for 30 years. He turned his head and looked at me through the screen door. "Hey, Mitch," he said. "I'm going to tell you what I saw, and I need you to hear all of it." His face was André's face. The chipped tooth, the sun-darkened skin, the crow's feet around the eyes, the scar on his chin from a fishhook accident when he was 12. All of it correct, all of it accurate in a way that went beyond resemblance into identity. But his eyes were wrong. Not the color, not the shape, the depth. André's eyes had always been animated. Quick, warm, tracking whatever was in front of him with the engaged attention of a man who liked the world and wanted to see what it was doing. These eyes had the same color and shape, but they were still. They didn't track. They were aimed at me the way a camera is aimed. Recording, not seeing. And his mouth. When he said, "Hey, Mitch," his lips moved correctly, but they kept moving for a half-second after the words ended, as if the mechanism producing the speech and the mechanism producing the lip movement were running on slightly different clocks. And his hands. His hands were on the arms of the chair, and they were wet, not sweating. Wet the way things are wet when they've come out of the water. The chair arms under his fingers were dark with moisture, and the wetness was spreading slowly down the arms of the chair, pooling at the joints, dripping onto the porch boards. "You doing okay with the shop?" he asked. His voice was perfect. His mouth lagged behind the words by a fraction of a second. The water dripped from the chair. I didn't answer. Rule 7 applied to the front door, but the principle, silence, is the only correct reply, felt like it extended. Everything in me that understood the rules understood that speaking to this thing would be the same as opening the front door. It would be an invitation, a confirmation. Yes, I see you. Yes, I acknowledge you. Yes, you are real to me. "Mitch, I need to tell you something about the rules," the thing said. "There's a 10th rule. I didn't write it down because I didn't want to scare you, but you need to hear it now. Don't listen. Don't engage." I knew this. I could feel the knowledge like a physical structure inside me, load-bearing, holding up the walls. The 10th rule is, sometimes you have to let us in. That's the real rule. That's the one underneath all the others. The 9 rules aren't for keeping us out. They're for keeping us patient. They're for saying not tonight, not tonight, not tonight, so that when the night comes where you say tonight, we've waited long enough to deserve it. The thing wearing André's face smiled. The teeth were right. The chip, the slight overlap of the front incisors, but there were too many of them. In the back, behind the molars, I could see additional teeth, small and sharp and translucent, crowded into the jaw like something had kept growing after the human template ran out of space. "You left a gap, Mitch, 2 weeks ago. The gap is mine now. I've been coming through it a little more each night. The 3-second still water. That's me. That's my breath on the surface. And tonight I'm all the way through, and I'm sitting in my own chair on my own porch, and I'd like to come inside." I went to the counter. I picked up the gaff hook. André's gaff hook, sharpened to a point, mounted within arm's reach. I'd assumed it was for robbers. I'd assumed wrong. I went back to the screen door. The thing in the chair was standing now. It was facing me. It was still smiling with its too many teeth and its lagging mouth and its eyes that aimed without seeing. And the water was running off it freely now, streaming from its clothes and its hair and its fingertips, more water than a body could hold, as if the Bayou were pouring through it, using it as a channel. "Fermez pour la nuit," I said. "Retournez à l'eau." The thing tilted its head. André's gesture. The curious, slightly amused head tilt he did when someone said something he found interesting. That only works when the door's been closed right, Mitch. And you left it open. You left the sequence broken. The words are the lock, but the sequence is the key. And the key's been wrong for 2 weeks. It stepped toward the screen door. I opened the screen door, and I drove the gaff hook into its chest. Here's what I want to say about violence in a situation like this, and it's probably not what you expect. It didn't feel like killing. It didn't feel like self-defense. It felt like closing. Like the gaff hook was the last tumbler in the lock. The one that André hadn't been able to write down because it wasn't a rule you could put on paper. It was a rule you enacted with your body, with force, with the decision to stop being the person who follows the instructions and become the person who is the instruction. The hook went into the thing's chest and it didn't bleed right. The fluid that came out was Bayou water, brown and warm and thick with the organic silt of the marsh. And it smelled like the bottom of a drainage canal in August. The thing looked down at the hook in its chest, and then it looked at me, and its face was still André's face. And for one moment, one terrible fractional moment, the eyes were right. They were warm and quick and alive, and they looked at me with recognition and love, and something that might have been gratitude. Then the face lost cohesion. It softened, blurred, the features running together the way a reflection dissolves when you disturb the water. The body lost its shape. Shoulders slumping, torso compressing, the whole form collapsing inward like a structure losing its framing. Water poured from it, gallons, impossibly more than its volume should have contained, flooding the porch, running between the boards, streaming back toward the marsh and rivulets that found the slope and followed it with the efficiency of water returning to its source. In about 15 seconds, there was nothing on the porch but a puddle, and a ladder-back chair and a gaff hook lying in the wet. I picked up the hook. I went inside. I closed the screen door, the side door, the back door. I checked the live well. The water was moving. The pumps were running. The pogies were swimming. No 3-second pause, no stillness. The gap was closed. I sat on the floor behind the counter and I shook for about 20 minutes, and then I finished the close. I said the words. I waited until 10. I walked to my truck. I drove home. I did not look in the rear view until the Pointe aux Chênes sign. That was 5 days ago. I've closed the shop every night since, and the rules have worked perfectly, in order. 9 steps, 9 tumblers. And every night the lock engages and the building transitions from open to closed, and the seam holds. No knocking, no fifth freezer, no still water, no chairs on the porch. It's quiet in the way that Dulac is always quiet. The quiet of a place where the land is slowly being swallowed by the water, but the people who remain have decided to stay and keep the lights on anyway. I'm one of those people now. I didn't plan to be. A month ago I was selling brake pads in Houma and wondering what the point was. Now I'm selling bait in Dulac and I know exactly what the point is, even though the point is terrifying and lonely and will probably shorten my life the way it shortened André's. I'm closing the seam every night, 9 steps. But I need to tell you one more thing, and this is the thing I can't stop thinking about. The thing that wakes me up at 4 a.m. and sits on my chest like a physical weight. I called Trosclair the morning after I used the gaff hook. I told him what happened. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, André's grandfather used a gaff hook too, once. in 1974. He told André about it. He said the thing he killed was wearing his brother's face. His brother who drowned in the Bayou in 1962. Why are they wearing our family's faces? They're not wearing them, Mitchell. Think about it. Think about where the Bayou is and where the shop is and what a seam means. It's not two different places. It's one place with a line through it. The people on the other side of the seam aren't imitations. They're the other half. The part that went into the water and kept going. André didn't go into the water. He had a stroke. André died on the porch of the shop, facing the bayou, on the seam. The silence after that was the loudest thing I've ever heard. You're saying André is on the other side. I'm saying something with André's face and André's voice, and André's love for you came up to the seam and knocked on the door, and you put a gaff hook through its chest. And I'm saying that was the right thing to do. And I'm saying you're going to have to live with both of those facts for the rest of your life, because that's what it costs to hold the line. I'm holding the line. The shop opens at 5 a.m. I'm here every day, selling shiners and pogies and frozen mullet to fishermen who don't know what I do at 9 o'clock every night. They don't know that the bait shop where they buy their morning coffee and swap their fishing stories is a door that has to be locked in the right order by someone who's willing to lock it. They don't know that the bayou they fish in has another side that isn't on any map, and that the things on that side look like people they used to love. They don't need to know. That's my job. That's what André left me. Not a business, not a building. A responsibility that someone has to carry, and he chose me, and I don't get to put it down. 9 rules, every night, in order. The knocking will come back. It always comes back, Trosclair says. Different voices, different tactics. It learns, it adapts, it finds new shapes to wear, and new words to say, and new ways to sound like something you'd open the door for. And when the 9 rules aren't enough, when the thing in the water learns the 9 and finds a gap, I'll write a 10th. And when it learns the 10, I'll write an 11th. The way André did. The way his grandfather did. This is not a story about a bait shop. This is a story about a seam between 2 versions of the same place, and a family that has been stitching it shut for 65 years, one closing at a time. My name is Mitchell Landry. I run Thibodeau Live Bait and Tackle in Dulac, Louisiana. I open at 5. I close at 9. After 9, don't knock. I won't answer, even if you use a voice I love, especially if you use a voice I love.